Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be able to speak to you again. I will try and be very brief because I noticed that we are way past lunchtime and the day has gone already. But it's been 3 days of enjoyable labor. I honestly enjoyed, I think, some of the knowledge sharing that has happened here. And I am confident that we leave from this place, I think, better informed to be able to contribute better to the society where we've come from. The subject of energy mix is as political as it is energy related. And I wanted to maybe speak specifically to some of the key considerations that policymakers need to take into account when they are either legislating or formulating policy on the issue of energy mix. Now, the need for energy for humanity is as old as humanity. And as our population increases, the demand for energy is continuing to grow. And then the key question that I think all that have to answer is that, well, what are the various sources of energy that we need to be able to ensure that there is a better quality of life for all? And over the last, I would say, since the Kyoto Protocol, and we now have, even with the United Nations environmental initiatives, the importance of ensuring that we have environmentally friendlier energies is as urgent, as important as ever. And so something that I believe that is a mistake, particularly in terms of on the line of, on the account of policymakers, has been really looking at substitution in order to address the environmental question. So you substitute what has been to try and answer the environmental question. But if I'm having listened to the various panel of experts that have presented here over the last 3 days, I am more convinced that, in fact, that is a wrong approach to look at substitution. The question is that, what is the position that can bring about harmony we need to take into account? As the population of the world increases, and on the first day of the conference, I spoke about the urbanization, increased urbanization, where by 2050, it's said that over 70% of the world's population will be living in urban areas. Therefore, it brings to us that what are the policies that can be pursued today, taking into account what life will be by the year 2050 and beyond. So it is clear to me that for the urbanized, so the key thing that I want you to consider is that policymakers need to approach it that you need an energy mix which is appropriate for the conditions of the country in question, but also not only appropriate, but that are efficient. So the issue of efficacy needs to come in. And I give an example. For industrialized and developing nations, and as we see with urbanization, that industrial development, it requires of us to answer the question of energy supply, and specifically power or electricity, in a constantly reliable manner of supply, but that must also ensure that is the least cost possible and in an environmentally friendlier manner. And those, for me, are the 3 key pillars that should be the foundational pillars for any energy policy of any nation, taking into account that as their population grows, as urbanization becomes more and more than it was, that therefore we cannot run away from that we need to provide power in a base load form. And therefore, that means you have to be asking questions that, well, where do the renewables or intermittent energy sources apply or feature in the mix? So to the extent that they answer the environmental question, by and large, the intermittent and largely renewable energy sources fail on two accounts, that is of supplying reliably and cost effectively. So therefore it means that it is not an appropriate solution for an urbanizing planet, though it is still important in the mix. If I give an example, the first day I spoke about people who have been burning anthracitic coal, which is a smokeless fuel, now having moved to bituminous coal, and therefore causing all manner of respiratory health problems resulting from the pollution that comes from there. So the renewables, in my study and having looked at the number of countries, I believe that it is not renewables are not appropriate solution for the grid, but for microgrids and domestic heating, that's what you need, that's what you can bring into an energy mix, particularly for remote areas. But as we urbanize, it therefore means that for us who are in the fossil fuel industry, we need to be working closer with the policymakers to ensure that as they formulate policy, they take into account some of the things that we've discussed here. That how do we ensure that fossil fuels can continue to be the mainstay of power supply, but that would do so in the least cost possible. And I spoke about the optimization of, or rather expanding the product range that you can extract from fossil fuels in order to increase your revenue per ton of coal or per barrel of oil or per cubic feet of gas that is extracted. That is key, that is important, and I think this is really what we should be pursuing from a forum such as the World PetroCoal Congress. But that renewables, we should also be helping to advocate that they are more suitable for microgrids for domestic. Now I'll give two examples. We speak about Germany, which is the largest industrialized nation in Europe and the largest economy in Europe. But that is also priding itself of having the highest renewable energy sources. Then, based on what I've just said, we find that Germany is paying the highest cost per kilowatt hour of energy than its peers. We go to my home country of South Africa, where we pride ourselves as being the leader in the area of renewable energy into the grid, where we've to date spent over $15 billion investment from the private sector in terms of independent power producers that are feeding that energy into the grid. But in both scenarios, when we look at renewables as part of the mix, the question that is rarely ever considered is, what is the mega hours that can be derived from renewable sources? Solar storage has remained a problem from the beginning. Some of you might know of the great inventor Nikola Tesla. In fact, when we look at his works, he's done so much work just over 100 years ago in terms of how to harness solar energy that it can really be the solution to the world. So the issue, the challenge and the difficulty of an appropriate economically viable storage solution has been a problem for well over 100 years. So which in turn means that to the extent that it is environmentally friendly, it is still not yet an appropriate solution for what we need. Now, in South Africa, having done that, having invested over 15 billion US dollars from the private sector, our power utility, Eskom, finds themselves in a difficult environment whereby when we look at the energy system of South Africa, and hence I spoke about that each country would vary. Our neighboring countries are not energy intensive users. So therefore our energy system is designed specifically for South Africa, and we're running over 90% of our energy is derived from fossil fuel, coal. Now, when we feed in solar energy into the grid, instead of having concentrated on the microgrid or domestic supply, the net result is that the power utility Eskom loses over 600 million US dollars annually. And you'd ask why? Because those of you, I'm preaching to the converted here, you already know that if with urbanization and the peak demand for energy comes at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. depending whether it's winter or the summer months, and I'm running a coal-fired boiler, I cannot go and start that coal-fired boiler at 3 p.m. I have to go and start it, ignite it at 10 a.m. And that is exactly the same time that we are starting to receive solar energy which is fed into the grid. But we have nobody to sell that extra grid to in terms of our neighbors because they are not energy intensive, they are sufficient. So you then end up with a double cost of acquiring power from solar or renewables that is not stored and therefore has to go straight into the grid, and taking into account all the other grid management challenges that you sit with. And at the same time, as the power utility, you sit with generation of power in order to be able to meet your peak demand in the evening, when the renewable sources are no longer there. Even some of the storage that we have, it doesn't run for more than 6 hours in terms of the batteries, and also the capacity is a lot more reduced. So these are the key challenges that I believe that policymakers need to consider, and more so for India, see that there is a push in order for us, for you as a nation, and I think for all of us as the signatories to the COP21 agreement, to say how do we then reduce the carbon emissions. But in so doing, I feel that we have neglected these key fundamental questions, because in the end, the $600 million that I'm saying is lost by the energy utility in South Africa is actually being passed on to the consumer, therefore having a direct impact on the economy and direct impact on the inflation and a whole host of other things. So we really have to look at energy and power in a holistic manner and not in a narrow manner that sometimes I feel policymakers have been having that. So I want to leave you with this. The three key pillars are reliable supply of electricity at the least cost possible in an environmentally sustainable manner. So it therefore means that any taxation that the policymakers are looking to impose on the fossil fuel industry, I'm saying that taxation needs to go directly into the research and development to ensure that fossil fuels are environmentally, rather generated and supplied in an environmentally sustainable and friendlier manner. And for me, those three key pillars are foundational that can ensure that we can indeed eradicate energy poverty, which we all agree that it is the biggest challenge that is facing humanity and the way of life, where many are not enjoying the things that we do. And the key question that needs to also be asked is that, well, if we are talking about renewables, we need no longer be speaking about installed capacity in terms of megawatts, but we need to be talking about the supply capacity in terms of megawatt hours. And when we start to look at megawatt hours, we will then no longer be asking ourselves that should we be going renewables to substitute fossil fuels, but we'll be looking that therefore, because the megawatt hour capacity is so much lower than you have with fossil fuels, therefore it means that renewables are applicable in an environment, as I say, whereby domestic in a less urbanized environment. I thank you.